Here we are in Parque Miraflores, Look at Flowers Park in Seville, Spain. Pretty soon it's going to be too hot to do videos outside. My telephone would explode. But I'm going to take advantage of the weather while I can. Today, we're going to talk about Heresy Press. Heresy Press was founded in January of 2023 by Bernard Schweitzer, a former professor of English at Long Island University, who, according to his bio, has an enduring fascination for literature that challenges boundaries of accepted social, cultural, and religious norms. According to the website, Heresy Press is a haven for ambitious, outspoken fiction that rigorously prioritizes creative freedom and literary quality above conformity in ideological credos. There's some big names on its advisory board: Sherman Alexie, the Native American poet and writer; Meghan Daum, the writer and podcaster; Joyce Carol Oates, who is basically an institution all herself in American letters; Richard North Patterson, the internationally best-selling writer of thrillers, who is also a political pundit; and Steven Pinker, the experimental, or the Canadian experimental psychologist, all of whom have taken heat and in some cases have suffered serious career setbacks for their outspoken views on the culture wars. Junot Diaz is also on the advisory board. A renegade faction of the Me Too movement, led by Carmen Machado, tried to take down Junot Diaz in 2018 after he published his piece, The Silence in the New Yorker, about his abuse, how he was physically abused as an 8-year-old, and then his womanizing as an adult. Isn't it interesting how, as soon as Junot Diaz became persona non grata in the literary world, Carmen Machado slipped in as the sort of star token Hispanic in the contemporary canon? Anyway, when I heard about Heresy Press, I was intrigued, because I do believe that there is a kind of ideological curation. I don't know if it's conscious or unconscious, at least in the world of literary books, in that it limits what's put out and what's promoted, and which overlooks the literary sensibilities of a huge swath of the reading public, myself included. So I decided to read and review the first 4 novels that Heresy Press is bringing out. Heresy Press has also brought out a collection of a dozen short stories called Nothing Sacred: Outspoken Voices in American Fiction. But I'm going to focus on just the longer works of fiction to see whether Heresy Press walks the walk. So let's get down to business. Deadpan by Richard Walter is the first novel that Heresy Press came out with. Walter ran the screenwriting program at UCLA for decades. He's 80 years old, and according to him, he was working on Deadpan for 50 years before it was finally published. He praises Schweitzer's bravery for publishing it, claims that no one else wanted it for being too hot a potato. That led me to believe that it was going to be more edgy. I guess it is edgy for this day and age, but of course this is the day and age of literary milquetoast, so the bar is set really low. Still, like I say, it has its moments of edginess, especially in how it deals with anti-Semitism. There's one line, I think it's the bravest in the book, which runs the risk of being interpreted as the Jews almost asking for it. The protagonist says, "If bigots like me aren't haunting, taunting, and stalking them, they're almost disappointed." And it comes at a point in the narrative where the protagonist has won us over as being a generally decent and sensible guy. And so you get the sense that the protagonist's point of view and Walter's point of view coincide at this point. In a nutshell, it's the story of Dwight Bridges, this bigoted but relatively harmless owner of a Buick dealership in Hogswallow Hollow, West Virginia, this podunk town that's nestled in the mountains, and how one day he is suddenly transformed into this massively popular deadpan Jewish comedian named Richie Richie, whose mere presence among his fans, and his fans are everyone, causes this kind of blind hysteria in which everything that he says in his deadpan style, of course, when Dwight Bridges is saying it, it's not an act, comes across as utterly hilarious. It's a wild ride of a book as far as setting. It starts out during the 1970s oil crisis and keeps coming back to that, but whenever Dwight Bridges transforms into Richie Richie, he's transported to different eras, to different settings, to different casts of characters. It's almost like, I would describe it as like Borscht Belt magic realism. There is this one masterful scene where Richie Richie is with Mel Brooks, Don Rickles, Milton Berle, and Jerry Lewis. It is just a tour de force of comedy and verisimilitude. But I couldn't help thinking, like, how many readers under the age of 45 or 40 are even going to know who these comedians are, much less what their acts were like, to be able to appreciate the mastery of the scene. Anyway, every chapter is cut like a diamond. The prose and the dialogue is just so sharp. Every chapter ends with this kind of punchline of narrative surprise. There are these running gags and this play with language that never gets old. There were times when I got a bit impatient with Walter's technical prowess, just wanting him to let rip and try to land with a wild haymaker, but the book comes through in the end. There are a couple of kicker final scenes, and it tells the truth. It does not lie about the stubbornness and the messiness of racism. Walter makes humor out of, and therefore challenges our point of view on some very, very important and relevant subject matter. So bravo. The Hermit is the debut novel of Katerina Grishakova about the New York investment banking world, which Grishakova worked in for over a decade after emigrating from Moscow in 1996 when she was in her early 20s. The protagonist is Andy Sylvain, a 50-year-old managing director of a big midtown Manhattan financial capital company. So right off the bat, you've got a woman, an immigrant, writing from the perspective of a 50-year-old American man. So that very flawed assumption that writers cannot write outside of their gender or cultural identities is given no truck, either by the press or by Grishakova. Sylvain lives this life of conspicuous consumption in sort of master of universe style, but he's lost his ambition. He's no longer as shrewd as he once was. He can no longer read a room like he once could. It's as though his looking inward has kind of dulled his brilliance in business. And as the story progresses, he has these run-ins with these different oddball intellectuals, gurus, and charlatans who offer him ways out, but only manage to give him more pause, or to sort of fan the flames of his discontent and self-reflection. Grishakova can write a vivid scene or almost anywhere. I mean, and she does it with vigorous muscular prose. The Pierre Hotel in New York, Vegas, a wellness sanatorium in the Catskill Mountains, an upscale backyard barbecue in Westchester, a MAGA rally. The Andy Sylvain's jet-setting dilettante girlfriend Lauren, who collects identities as if they were weaponry, is just so relentlessly but also sweetly drawn. I've never really read a character like her. Comparisons will obviously be made to Bonfire of the Vanities, Thomas Wolfe's sprawling 1987 social novel about New York City, but I think more to the point, The Hermit is an old-fashioned novel of ideas, reminiscent of Dostoevsky, who is an admitted influence of Grishakova. I mean, it takes gonads in a debut novel to take on questions like, what is the meaning of life? I'm serious. Or what are the fundamental differences between men and women? Or what is progress? Or is there such a thing as gratuitous advancement? And you know, she does these questions justice. She's up to the task. I guess the danger of an idea novel is that sometimes the characters and the events kind of become props to espouse the ideas in question or to put them on display for the reader. And I guess in the later chapters, the novel kind of falls into that. You know, it sort of, you see the strong authorial hand rather than the narrative sort of developing organically. But, you know, at that point in the story, Grishakova had earned my trust, so I went with her willingly enough. And, you know, the ending is really interesting because it's as though Grishakova wants to implicate us with it. I mean, I don't want to ruin it for you, but it's as though Grishakova is saying that if we don't feel this ending deeply, that might be our own personal tragedy. All right. Another thing I really liked about this book is that it doesn't bang the drum of any social cause. It's neither like rah capitalist, nor does it lament, how did I hear it put the other day in a literary podcast, the systematic injustices of late American capitalism. Okay? It portrays the bro culture of the financial world without disdain. Race comes up brilliantly at times, but there's zero identity politics. You get the sense that, or there's no whiff of either wokeness or anti-wokeness in Grishakova's story, and that is just so refreshing. Novel number 3, Animal, Notes from a Labyrinth by Alan Fishbone, a classics professor, a martial arts instructor, a sailboat captain, a translator of Greek, Latin, and Spanish. You know, I think so many young male writers dream about publishing a book of autofiction like this, giving their youthful and sometimes puerile obsessions and preoccupations depth. The problem is that so few young writers have the talent, the detachment, and the self-insight to pull it off. Alan Fishbone is gifted with all that. You read his hormone-charged, anxiety-fraught, fuck this shit, sometimes scatological ramblings and musings, and you think, shit, he's got a point. I hadn't thought of it like that. You know, it's Fante-like, Bukowski-like, Richard Brautigan-like, Hunter S. Thompson-like. It's got a wild, off-the-rocker nature to it. At one point, he calls himself anal expulsive. It's like the chronicles of his bohemian life in Berlin as he recalls old romantic relationships, conversations, teachers, traveling adventures, classic books he's read, on the fringes, artists that he's met. It really casts wide. Perhaps it lacks focus and direction. It's a short novel, or because it's a short novel, under 100 pages, I just feel like it should have built momentum and ended more deftly. It just kind of stops. We readers kind of get off exactly where we got on. Is it bold? Yes, it's bold. It unabashedly is about raging masculinity. Finally, a recently published book that unapologetically appeals to, let's say, hopped up heterosexual men. Kudos to Heresy Press for publishing it. If I had read this book 20 or 25 years ago, when I was still single, unattached, and with no plans to settle down, then I'm sure the book would have impacted me much, much more. Okay, novel number 4, Unsettled States. It's a kind of whodunit mystery crime novel written by a guy named Tom Casey, a retired airline pilot. He's written a couple of other novels. One of them was blurred by the great Robert Stone, and one of them was blurred by the great Norman Mailer. So it's not as though Tom Casey doesn't come to us highly recommended. The story is set in this ritzy Connecticut seaside suburban town where this mysterious murder of a woman takes place, and a local detective named Mallory sets out to solve it. I've read a lot of crime fiction in my life. I think I've read all of Lawrence Block's Matthew Scudder's series. I've also read a lot of books by the great John MacDonald. You know, the great genre writers put some of the best literary writers to shame on a sentence level. The problem with crime novels for me is that the ends always leave me disappointed. Even when they surprise me, it's not sufficient. The strength of the prose and the characters have led me to believe that these excellent authors, if they had wanted to, could have given me something more on the depth of the human condition, or something not quite so neat. The end of Unsettled States, on the other hand, is spectacular. It's surprising, it's thought-provoking, it's intellectually stimulating, it's satisfying. It's even potentially off-putting to certain maybe uptight, hardcore Catholics. It's not anti-Catholic from my point of view. And that's coming from somebody who was raised happily in quite a strict Catholic home. Also, the first 70 pages of the book are very, very charged and taut. The problem with Unsettled States is that in between, it's just so uneven. These scintillating passages about sailing, or about this kinky sex house in Manhattan, or this one passage written from the perspective of someone who dies when they're hit by a truck, or there's this character Bradley Davis, he's this peeping Tom librarian. I mean, his presence in the book is almost worth the price of admission. So you have all this great stuff, and it's side by side with what, I mean, to me seems like the work of an amateur. Overwrought, drawn out, unnecessary scenes and setup. I mean, I just think that the book should have been structured, paced, and edited more artfully. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. If I weren't doing this video on the first 4 novels that Heresy Press is putting out, I would have put this book down out of frustration. I would have given up on it. Now, I'm glad I finished it because, like I said, the ending is so excellent, but, you know, both Casey and his editors should have worked harder to kill his darlings. Less would have been so much more with this book. Conclusions. Heresy Press, with his first 4 novels, has created a bundle of solid literary quality. 2 exceptional novels in Deadpan and the Hermit, 1 very readable, always intelligent manifesto on raw and turbulent manhood titled Animal Notes from a Labyrinth, and 1 crime novel, Unsettled States, which has flashes of literary brilliance. With these offerings, Heresy Press is appealing to literary sensibilities that I don't think are sufficiently represented in the current literary scene, which, in my opinion, caters to readers of a certain gender, age, and political inclination. What do I mean by political inclination? Well, you know, rabidly anti-Trump and anti-Elon Musk, smugly anti-capitalist, obliviously passive-aggressive at times, obsequiously respectful of gender and racial identity theorists. I mean, sort of like anti-privilege, privileged folk. I mean, so Heresy Press is offering those of us who are not at all like that, but who also have more than a bone to pick with the conservative right, books or novels that are not laced with nauseating propaganda. And I'm not saying that those who create these novels that are laced with nauseating propaganda, either on the left or on the right, are aware that they're doing it. Okay? There's my rant. One last thing. I wish that Heresy Press would put more emphasis into design. Okay? All of the covers, with perhaps the exception of Deadpan, seem to me to be a bit uninspired. Why not hire a designer who can give Heresy Press books a distinctive look? You know, some recognizable branding element that all Heresy Press novels share? Look at presses like Hamilcar Publications, or Autofocus, or in England, CB Editions. Design-wise, all of these presses have managed to successfully distinguish themselves. Just from the covers, you know that you're picking up something different, something that comes from a particular literary sensibility. I wish that Heresy Press would follow their lead. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope that this video has given you something fun and worthwhile to read.